Hello, everyone. This is our group's project on Paul Strand. Paul Strand was a modern American photographer and distinguished for being a pioneer of straight photography. His work can be characterized by his exploration of geometric forms, sharp focus, and strong contrast. Strand was born in 1890 and raised in New York City, where he lived with his family as an only child. Strand would go on to travel to different parts around the world throughout his career, and eventually settled in France with his wife Hazel, where he spent the rest of his days until his passing in 1976 at the age of 85. Despite receiving his first Brownie camera at 12 years old, Strand's love of photography didn't start until a couple of years later when his parents enrolled him into the Ethical Culture School on Central Park West. There, an extracurricular course was being offered in photography that was taught by Louis W. Hine. This is where Strand learned the fundamentals of the camera and darkroom work. By the age 17, Strand knew he wanted to become an artist in photography. He then went on to graduate from ethical culture and by 21 went into business for himself as a professional photographer. Quality in work is prerequisite to quality of expressiveness, is a quote Strand stood by throughout his career.
Moving into his careers, Paul Strand did not only work as a photographer in life. He worked as both a freelance and professional photographer, filmmaker, and cinematographer. As a lesser-known fact, he also worked as an X-ray technician serving in the Army Medical Corps. In his work as a cinematographer and filmmaker, he worked on films such as Native Land, The Plow That Broke the Plains, and Manhattan. Throughout his life, there were some moments that shaped his career. Some of the prime examples are in early 1915, he mentored with Alfred Stieglitz, who was a champion of modern photography and was a major inspiration and guide for Strand's career. In August 31st, 1917, Strand exhibited a new style called straight photography. This style emphasized clarity, abstraction, and everyday scenes. And finally, in December 31st, 1919, he made his filmmaking debut working on Manhattan. This film showcases an innovative use of imagery and techniques, showing the capabilities of powerful storytelling between cinema and photography. A powerful quote that helps encapsulate his work that I found was, "I like to photograph people who have strength and dignity in their faces. Whatever life has done to them, it hasn't destroyed them."
Talking about Paul Strand's techniques and materials used, he largely used a technique that was known as straight photography, which was when prints were not manipulated during processing and was a pure representation of the photographic method. He also largely opposed manipulative print methods because he wanted to express the true essence of photography, which is known as chiaroscuro, which is a strong contrast between lights and darks, and he believed that this was achieved without manipulation. He largely worked with platinum prints for its rich densities, but then switched to Santesia paper due to limited availabilities of platinum paper. To talk about some works that stood out, one photo that came up was Blind Woman, and it's special because it utilizes false lens to capture candid shots of people without their awareness. To quote Alfred Stieglitz, he said that his work is pure, it is direct, it does not rely on tricks or processes. What makes it special is this forced the viewer to confront her plight and to acknowledge her because she belonged to a marginalized group of people that would often go ignored. The false lens allowed for people to get a more honest and living expression of the subject. Another photo that stood out was known as White Fence, that was a part of his essay note called Photography and appeared on a quarterly issue of Camera Work. This photo was meant to function as a catalyst to establish the American identity during World War I and reject European tradition. He meant for this white fence to be an archetype of society and to symbolize ownership and division of property, which is a basic freedom. And one last work that stood out was known as City Hall Park. And this stood out because during this time where it was taken, Manhattan started to expand upwards with skyscrapers and gave people a new perspective of their city. So Paul Strand took advantage by embracing this new perspective and capturing photos of people with scenes of kinetic energy, which simply put is a lot of people moving around. And he was very deliberate with this photo. He even removed a figure, to achieve his desired effect, going against his number one rule.
So now we will go into the importance of each of these photographs, starting off with City Hall Park in 1950. So With Paul Strand, he has a direct and straight approach for his photograph. And this direct approach usually does not involve any form of alteration or tampering with the negative. Even though that City Hall Park was ironically altered, but it still have that straightforwardness that Paul Strand was aiming for. Same thing with Wall Street in 1915. It also have that pure and direct approach of photographing, and it has an influence on modernism, repetition of shape and simplicity. This kind of straight photography showing clear dislike of soft focus and any other manipulation, and also maintaining balance between rational and objective on one side and the emotional on the others. One thing interesting about this photograph is that people in the photograph were reduced to nothing but subordinates or puppets that could be swallowed by the black holes in any moment. Moving on to Blind Woman in 1916, it also had that straight, direct approach of photographing and also the use of false lenses, which allow a more realistic aspect of the subject in the photograph. So with the close-up shot, it forces the viewer to look at the blind woman and acknowledge her assistant. And one quote by John Berger from the book Aspect of Modernism in page 254 stated that while the picture remain in front of us, we can never take them as real. It forces us to reflect on the significance of seeing itself. Lastly, the white fence in 1916, it also again had that pure and direct approach of photographing a Paul Strand, and also the influence of modernism, and it forces the viewer to look at the subject ahead instead of looking around. And one quote by Mark Howard Booth stated that Strand announced his view of realism as an approach that builds the world in cleanly jointed planes and actively confront the viewer rather than a floating atmospheric scene.